Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 29 of Buha's Block. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by the host of Lakers Nation, the person that the most people in my comments were clamoring for. You guys asked for Trevor Lane, and I did my best to deliver. And on today, of all days, we had a rundown for today's show, and that rundown got completely slashed. Trevor, how are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there. It's been a day, Jovan, and this is a fun and exciting kind of day because we get this kind of wow out of nowhere news. But yeah, it's been quite a day. I'm running on fumes, but I'm excited to be here and talk some Lakers basketball with you.
Yeah, so it's been a day. So we had our plans to record a few hours ago. I had a lengthy dentist appointment that just happened to be on today of all days that kind of disrupted things. But I had an alarm set to wake up and start doing some prep for our show and prepping for our rundown. And I wake up to an avalanche of calls and texts and tweets and just Lakers Twitter's on fire, NBA Twitter's on fire, Twitter's on fire. And it was madness, absolute madness. So for those who are not up to date yet, though I assume most people are by the time you are listening to this, in a stunning and shocking development, the Lakers are now in conversations with UConn men's basketball head coach Dan Hurley, as first reported by ESPN. And according to ESPN, they're going to be preparing a lucrative multi-year offer to Hurley. And this flies in direct contrast to a lot of the previous reporting over the last few weeks, reporting that I had been involved in, where everything around the league and internally within the Lakers that had been coming out was JJ Redick. And, there was always the caveat of it's not a done deal, that Redick, until the contract is officially signed, that Redick is not the coach. But if there was a favorite at the time over the last few weeks, like from the beginning of the process, JJ Redick's name has been tied to the Lakers. And even, there was a couple weeks ago, LeBron James put out a statement through Clutch Sports CEO and James's agent, Rich Paul, that LeBron was not involved in the coaching search and he was not going to make a recommendation or back JJ Redick, because that was a lot of the speculation that LeBron and JJ have their podcast. So of course, JJ's LeBron's a guy, and LeBron's been grooming him for this position and interviewing him and all this stuff. But even with that, and LeBron seemingly taking a back seat in terms of voicing his opinion one way or the other, JJ was consistently the name that we had at The Athletic, the name that ESPN had, name that several other outlets and newsbreakers had. And despite that, it seems to have taken a bit of a left turn. And now Dan Hurley appears to be the favorite, though depending on who you talk to, could be a slight favorite, could be a heavy favorite. There are some ranges of intel that I've heard throughout the day. But with the madness of today and the chaos and the Lakers coming out of nowhere with this coaching candidate that, I think there had been somewhere between 7 or 8 names that had been reported on throughout this process. Dan Hurley was not one of them. So with all that said, where are you at now that the shock has wore off a little bit with Dan Hurley, and just your thoughts overall on how this has unfolded over the last 5 weeks or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest surprise is that the Lakers were able to keep it quiet. As you said, everybody has been hearing, oh, it's JJ. It's going to be JJ Redick. We're confident it's going to be JJ. We've all been hearing that stuff. And now suddenly Dan Hurley from, I don't know, I was amazed. I was shocked when I woke up to that news as well, that somehow here we are and we've got a different name coming in at this stage. So, impressive from the Lakers to keep that quiet for as long as they did and manage to keep that under the radar. But overall, I think he checks some boxes that are some question marks for JJ Redick in terms of he's got coaching experience. And that's certainly something that matters. But I think what intrigues me the most in this is, are we seeing a shift in terms of the philosophy of the Lakers if they do target someone like Dan Hurley? Specifically, we keep hearing some version of program building as connected to hiring Dan Hurley. And is that a realization from the Lakers that under the new collective bargaining agreement, it's very, very difficult to put a team together and then keep that team together long term. So that means you have to have a constant influx of new talent on cheaper contracts. In other words, young players that you're developing along the way, and if you want to have any kind of sustainability. So I do wonder if this is a philosophical switch from the Lakers, where they're recognizing that you can no longer have this idea that we're just going to get the stars, target stars, and the role players around them, well, they matter, but not all that much. It seems like maybe there's a shift taking place here where now they're recognizing that, yes, we're still going to go after stars. They're always going to be the Lakers, but they do need to make sure that they are developing those role players, developing those guys that are going to come in and really support those star level players. And Dan Hurley, I think, would be a big step in that direction, developing that type of mentality. So I'm excited if this is a change in the direction of the Lakers, and I think it's an important one in the modern NBA.
I really like that point, and I think I look back at last season with the handling of Cam Reddish versus Max Christie. And Cam had the nice start to the season, and he was shooting the ball well. And in the month of November, I believe he was 7th in both steals and deflections for that month. And then he dealt with injuries largely for the rest of the season. But whenever he was healthy, he was still ahead of Max Christie in the pecking order. And on the one hand, you could look at Cam Reddish and his pedigree and his potential and say, that's a guy that is worth investing in or grooming or developing. But I also look at a guy like Max Christie, who just turned 21 a couple months ago and has, to me, shown a lot of potential as a 3-and-D prospect in the NBA, and is younger than some of the guys that are going to go in the first round in this upcoming draft. And to me was a guy like, I look back at that. I referenced this New York game, that game that they had in early February, which coincidentally was the game where the Lakers made the starting lineup change. They put Rui in for Taurean Prince. That was also a game that Max Christie closed, and I thought played really well down the stretch. Had some good defense against Dante DiVincenzo, was switched on to Jalen Brunson for some possessions and really did a good job against him. And after that, I was like, I don't see how Max Christie can't be in the rotation from like he should be a rotation lock from this point on. And that was not that was no longer the case. And by the All-Star break, he was basically out of the rotation and didn't really play at all in the playoffs. So I look at like the way the Lakers handled that situation and the way a team like Denver handled Christian Brown and Peyton Watson and some of their younger talent, and didn't end up working out for Denver. They lost in the second round, and I think a disappointing fashion for them. But still, the process there, I think, was correct of we're going to rely on some of these younger, cheaper guys and develop them. So, and I thought Christian Brown, the Nuggets bench wasn't great in the playoffs, but I thought Christian Brown was one of the few bright spots in the Lakers series. I thought he had pivotal baskets and offensive rebounds, and did a really good job switching across D'Lo and Austin, and just made some really big, timely plays in that series that helped the Nuggets win it. To me, I think if that's the way that the Lakers go, whether it is Hurley, whether it is Redick, whether it's someone else, and there's another twist and turn in this coaching search, I think the Lakers approaching it that way is the right approach. And that's how they should be looking to build out next year's roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up Max Christie. It was one of my frustration points of the season that he wasn't getting a more consistent role, consistent minutes. I've been saying for a while, you look at the box score, and I believe Max played in, I want to say 66 games or something like that. It's misleading because he got so many times where he went into a game just for garbage time, and he was put into a different role than what he's really going to be in the NBA. We kind of saw Max get squeezed into this you're going to be the ball handler in a pick and roll situation type role. Kind of what he did last year at Summer League. We saw him doing that in garbage time minutes. That's not what he's going to do in a real competitive NBA game. He's going to be a 3-and-D guy. And there's tons of teams out there looking for 3-and-D guys. So it was unfortunate and surprising that he wasn't getting those minutes to develop. And I think it was not just you and me frustrated. I think there was frustration from within the Lakers that they weren't seeing Max Christie get those opportunities. So taking guys like him and in future players that you find in the second round, which we know the Lakers, they've had the ability to find talent in the draft. It's taking those guys and maximizing them and getting the most out of them. And if they're able to do that, that's going to go a long way towards moving this organization forward and into the future. Again, with the reality of a new restrictive CBA.
So we have a mixed history with college coaches transitioning over to the NBA. There have been some recent success stories. I look at a guy like Brad Stevens. I look at a guy like Billy Donovan, although his record's close to 500. That's partly been some of the recent years in Chicago. Historically, going back, Larry Brown or, Mike Fratello, like there's been different guys who have made the jump. And I think comparing like the 70s or 80s or 90s to now it's not the same. Yes, it's basketball and basketball is basketball, but there are changes in terms of shot clock, the halves and substitution patterns, like different things that like there's all those things, but then there's also the manner of dealing with players. And I think at times we've seen certain coaches come from the college ranks and they've struggled to adapt to, you're not coaching 18 to 22-year-olds. You're not the star of the program. You're not the one that has the job security necessarily compared to star players or even high-level role players, the way that they do in the NBA. So looking through that lens, where are you at with the potential Hurley hiring and how he would adapt? Because I think from an X's and O's perspective, it seems like he's already running an NBA offense. He might be the best coach in college basketball. He might be the best tactician offensively in college basketball. And I think those things would certainly transition well. But in terms of his personality, he's clearly a fiery guy. I know UConn's among the college leaders in terms of technical fouls, and like he's gotten into it with refs and with fans, and he's very fiery and passionate. I think those are all good qualities, but then you also see some of the viral clips that have been going around today, and it's like if he says some of those things to NBA players, particularly a LeBron James or an Anthony Davis, that is not going to go over well, and that has been a locker room that has been difficult to command. Based on the last couple of coaches and how those tenures have ended. So I think on the one hand, like having a sterner approach and maybe a tougher, more disciplined voice is a good thing, but there has to be a line there. There has to be a balance. And I think any college coach, I'm sure in an interview process or going through this is going to be like, well, yeah, of course I'll talk to them differently than I talk to an 18, 19-year-old, but actually applying that and doing that, I think has shown there have been mixed results with that. So looking at it through that lens, how do you see Hurley adapting and how do you see him fitting in and building that culture while also having to assimilate to NBA culture and what an NBA locker room is actually like versus what a college locker room is actually like?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be an adjustment period, right? I mean, he's coming in while he's got experience. It is still going to take time to adjust to the NBA game, and I think sometimes we can overlook how many ways a college coach would really have to adjust and how many different areas they would have to adjust in. So I think it's going to be a challenge for him. I don't think it's an insurmountable one, but in terms of you've got on the court, he's going to have to adjust to all the things that you mentioned, in addition to how he interacts with the officials. In the locker room, there's going to be a big adjustment there in terms of how does he relate with the players? How does he communicate with the players, especially over the course of an 82-game season? You look at a guy that is this fiery, this passionate, he's going to have to tone that down a bit because it's a marathon. It's a long season. If you're that emotional all the time in the NBA, well, you're going to run out of gas. You just can't do that. So he's going to have to make an adjustment there. Another area, though, that he's really going to have to work on things, it's in the press room, right? I mean, we've heard this before about Darvin Ham a little bit. I thought Frank Vogel actually did a great job at winning the press conference. And that's where you've got to make sure that you're saying the right things, especially with an organization like the Lakers, where single thing you say, every single thing you do is going to be cut up and it's going to be analyzed all the way. And then lastly, in the front office. And this is where I've already heard there's some concerns here. What happens with Rob Pelinka? What is the relationship like there? Will they be able to see eye to eye and work together? That's something that Danny Hurley, again, that fiery personality, that passion, all of that. What if there's a disagreement between he and Rob over which player it is that you want to target or a free agent signing or something like that? Can you develop a working relationship there? So I think in all those areas across the board, probably going to need to tone things down a little bit at the NBA level, especially when you're dealing with the athletes and everything else. When you've got superstars, we're talking about maybe the greatest of all time and LeBron James, you're not going to be able to do all the things that you can do at the college level. But again, I don't think it's impossible for him to do that. I think he definitely can do that. We just have to recognize that it is going to be a learning curve. There will be bumps in the road. There will be mistakes made. And sometimes it's very difficult for Lakers fans, for all of us, to have patience during those times. But even coming in with the resume that he's got, it's going to be an adjustment, and there will be bumps in the road for a guy like Danny Hurley.
I hadn't thought about the relationship between the head coach and the general manager. Like, obviously, that is an important factor in any situation, but specifically coming from college to the NBA, because in college you're essentially the head coach and the GM to an extent, because you're the guy recruiting people, and you have a say in what your roster looks like. And of course, guys can transfer, and some of that stuff is out of your control. And now you got all the NIL money and the booster stuff. But with that, like, it is an interesting thing, because you're not calling the shots. Like, Rob Pelinka and Jeannie Buss are calling the shots in terms of how they build out the roster. And of course, whoever their head coach is will have a say in that. And I've heard that the Lakers want that coach to have a say and it be a collaborative process. And they want to make sure that they are building out an identity for this roster that matches up with the head coach's philosophies. And that at the same time, the head coach has an adaptability to the roster of, hey, if we were planning on XYZ and, this player gets injured or this thing isn't working, we need to adapt to ABC. And that coach doing a better job of that. And I have heard that Hurley is very adaptable, and that he's played different defensive schemes with different big men. And he's not been necessarily married to one style of play on either end of the ball. So I think that's a really encouraging thing. But one thing within this that we will see what ends up happening in terms of, is it Dan Hurley? Is it JJ Redick? Is it someone else? But I have heard, for what it's worth, and I do have a report coming at The Athletic shortly, that talking to people today, they are not counting out JJ Redick. They don't view this as a done deal, that, the Lakers are pursuing Dan Hurley, but obviously it's a two-way pursuit, and he clearly has some level of interest. He is going to meet with the Lakers and go through a more formal interview process. As of now, they've only had preliminary talks, but if he does not decide to leave UConn and he decides to stay put, over there, then the Lakers still have a coaching search that they have to execute at that point, and they have to pivot. And I believe that JJ Redick would be that next candidate that would then be offered the job. And there's still the tricky timing with the finals and him calling it. And I know the Lakers are trying to get a coach in ASAP. They would love to have someone in place for draft workouts, and that stuff's going to be ongoing over the next couple of weeks before the June 26th draft. You and I haven't really discussed JJ. I think the last time we did a podcast was a couple months ago. So this was pre JJ. Where are you at with JJ? And then if this somehow doesn't go that way, in terms of Hurley staying put or the Lakers changing their mind, how kind of wild would that be with how the events of today have taken place?
You know what? I think, if anything, it would be unfortunate for JJ Redick if that's the way that it ultimately goes, that this Dan Hurley stuff came about, because what's happened is now everybody's excited about Dan Hurley, and all of the red flags that we were starting to become a little bit more comfortable with over the last week or so, people starting to come around, just being on the pulse of Lakers fans here. It seems like people were calming down a little bit and kind of recognizing that, it's probably going to be JJ Redick. Let's start to come around to the idea. Let's get behind this. Now it's like, oh, hey, it's Dan Hurley. This is going to be the guy, and great, because he checks all these boxes that JJ didn't, and off we go. So now it's going to be, if it's not Dan Hurley and it winds up being JJ, instead of this swell of support, I think there will be maybe a little bit of disappointment that it's not Dan Hurley at this point. So that's kind of unfortunate from the JJ Redick side of things. I think that he is, nothing has changed. He's still a fantastic basketball mind. There's still plenty of things to be concerned about in terms of his lack of experience. I mean, the guy hasn't coached at all, right? I mean, he's coached at the youth level, but that's it. That's certainly a concern. But I do think JJ is an extremely smart basketball mind, and he's somebody that, if the Lakers see a bright future with him, I think you got to go for it, especially in this coaching market. I think that he is, in some ways, the home run swing. He's a high risk move, but if you're the Lakers and you're looking at the state of the Western Conference, that might be what the situation calls for. You need somebody who can separate you from the rest of the Western Conference, that can give you something of a leg up, as opposed to just kind of keep you afloat. And it could wind up that the floor comes up fast and it doesn't work out. But I think JJ is at least a shot at trying to hit that next level of play, and believing that him bringing an outside perspective can give you something that can get there. So I still like JJ Redick as a coach. I think it's a huge gamble. It's a major risk on the part of the Lakers. It wasn't what I was expecting coming into this, given the situation their team is in. But again, I think the unfortunate part is now everybody is very excited about Dan Hurley. And if it does turn all the way back around to being JJ Redick again, there might be a little bit of disappointment in the air, which isn't really fair to JJ at all.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I view them both as high risk candidates. I just think Dan Hurley has the higher floor, right? Like I think there's
Yes.
a baseline level that he will provide as a head coach in comparison with JJ Redick, where I do think JJ is from listening to his podcast and having brief interactions with him and just following his career, like he is a very smart basketball mind, and I think like that part of the game and managing players, I think would I think he would excel in both of those categories. Like there's just the level of experience, and there's so many managerial aspects to it beyond just managing the locker room that go into being a successful head coach. And a lot of it is learning on the fly and just having those reps. And that is where I think there is some legitimate questioning or concerns with JJ. And so I do think Hurley coming in has a higher baseline, a higher floor for sure. Now, who has the higher ceiling? Like it's probably Hurley, just because we've seen, I mean, coming off 2 consecutive championships, back to back, has a chance to do a three-peat, which has not been done for decades in college basketball. Is clearly, at the peak of or entering the prime of his career right now at 51. Still has another 15, 20 years of coaching left if he so chooses. So I think like the Hurley decision makes sense. I think that the biggest thing is just how out of left field it came in terms of just no one, like, again, talking to people within the organization, around the organization today, a lot of people were shocked. And one thing that I have coming out in the Athletic that, I did hear from a couple of people that they had started to hear Dan Hurley as a name as recently as last week, but it was in the context of just like a name among the candidate pool and nothing of this is the guy we're targeting. This is the favorite. This is the front runner. And it's still been largely centered around JJ Redick and James Borrego over the last couple of weeks. And Borrego has the ties to Anthony Davis. They only overlapped like a month and a half in New Orleans, but that clearly left an impression on Anthony Davis where he has a solid rapport with Borrego. And that has been someone that he's been in communication with throughout this process. And the Lakers are factoring in what Anthony Davis wants. So that is a consideration for them and something that they are trying to weigh during this process. And it's one thing with trades because, teams are trying to be secretive. There's a strategic element to it of you're outbidding or you're trying to outbid your competitors. You're also trying to keep the bid at a reasonable price. And if it gets out, hey, we're offering this, then a team could drive up the price. But with the coaching stuff, really right now, the only head coaching opportunity that's available is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the only candidate that is really overlapping right now is James Borrego, because Kenny Atkinson has not really been in the mix for the Lakers over the last few weeks. So it is interesting that the Lakers decided to go this route in terms of the secrecy, because had Dan Hurley been mentioned 2 weeks ago, I don't think it really changes anything from if he's their guy, and it was the case 2 weeks ago, like I don't think it being out versus being a secret makes a real big difference in this, because if they're going to hire him, we're going to find out at some point. So I just thought that kind of that dynamic to this all was an interesting development in terms of like the shock with the coaching hire. Because a lot of times it's you kind of like, even looking back at like Darvin Ham, we knew Darvin Ham was in the mix with Terry Stotts and Scott Brooks and Kenny Atkinson, and like there was various guys the Lakers were talking to during that process. Going back to Frank Vogel, we knew about Ty Lue and Monty Williams, and we knew Frank, Jason Kidd, and like we knew the names, and it ended up being one of those guys. Like this, if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, like the fact that it played out this way, I just find fascinating.
It is interesting that you bring that up. I hadn't really thought about that. Like, I've been impressed that they were able to keep it a secret, but why keep it a secret? Like, what do you gain by doing that? And I suppose it could be, Dan Hurley doesn't want, his college program to be impacted or anything like that. He apparently had conversations with his team earlier today and explained that, yes, this is real. This is out there and you're going to be hearing this stuff now that the cat's out of the bag. But what's the method to the madness here? Why decide to keep this all so secretive? It's an interesting thing to think about as far as why you would do that from the Lakers side of things, and why allow it to continue to be, it's JJ, with an occasional like, hey, it's nothing's set in stone yet, nothing's done. A lot of this is noise and all of that. But it's interesting that you bring that up, that it is all secretive, because I can't really think of an organization from a Lakers perspective. How does it benefit you by keeping this quiet? I could see it if the Suns were still on the market, but the Suns were on the market for like 18 hours and then it was over.
they
So
had that in
I
place for
don't.
a while. Yeah.
It's impressive that they did it, but why did they do it? I don't know. Maybe we need to do wind horse fingers or something like that on this one.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get the answer in the coming days, if not
Right.
weeks. But I want to hit some of the initial topics that we were going to discuss. So I did a podcast on Wednesday about the 5 roster priorities, in my opinion, for the Lakers. Those in order were 3-and-D wings, ideally 2 or 3 of them. But I know that's asking for a lot. So at least 1. Then 2, a potential D'Lo replacement, and that would only be, of course, if D'Lo either leaves in free agency or is signed and traded or is opts in and is traded. So some form of D'Lo leaving. I think you need another. Doesn't have to be a starting level point guard, but at least a decent to solid backup. Maybe you start Gabe and Austin, depending on what your roster looks like. And then 3rd, a quality backup big man. Ideally, someone better than Christian Wood, someone a little bit more physical and defensive minded, someone who could hold up in a playoff series. Number 4, more 3-point shooting, especially if you lose D'Lo and Taurean Prince. Those are 2 of the Lakers' top 3 3-point shooters last year. So if you do end up losing those, that's a lot of volume and percentage going out the door. You need to replace that to some extent. And then number 5, a bench wild card / bench scorer, where going back to the 2023 team in the playoffs that made the conference finals, they had Rui Hachimura, Dennis Schroeder, and Lonnie Walker all coming off the bench. And Lonnie swung a game in the Warriors series. Dennis and Rui swung several games. And that was part of what made that team so special and made them go on that run from the number 7 spot. And looking at this past year, it was really just Taurean Prince who was a productive bench guy in the Denver series. And even then, it wasn't like he was setting the world on fire. It was simply just making a couple threes or a pump and go and finishing at the rim. It was always in that like 6 to 10 point range, not really being much of a difference maker. And I think the Lakers weren't at full strength. They didn't have Jared Vanderbilt. They didn't have Christian Wood, but I still think they were missing that type of wild card off the bench. So with that context of what I feel are my 5 priorities, what are your however many priorities you have, and how would you order them?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything you said there. I agree with all of those priorities for the Lakers. I think they are all incredibly important, of course, to varying degrees. The one thing that I would really like to see is a true physical big on this roster. And here's the thing, Jovan. There's a lot of people that say Anthony Davis needs to play the 4. I see this comment all the time. Anthony Davis needs to play the 4. That's his natural position, et cetera, et cetera. No, Anthony Davis, what makes AD great, or part of what makes him great, it's the flexibility. It's his versatility as a player. And the way you truly unlock that is having a lineup that will allow him to play either position depending upon the situation. That's what they had back in 2020 when they won the whole thing, is they had a lineup that allowed him to play the 5 when the situation called for it, typically to close out games. And then he could also play the 4. Now, he was shooting the 3 much better, but I still think they need a true physical big. And I'm talking about somebody who is bigger than Anthony Davis, or at the very least the same size. You put AD on the floor with Christian Wood, you put AD on the floor with Jackson Hayes, AD's still the 5. He's bigger than both those guys. He's going to be tasked with defending the biggest, most physical player on the other team. And there's certain matchups you don't want that. So I'm looking for a true big physical player. Maybe it's a Jonas Valanciunas could be a really interesting one. Our old friend Andre Drummond, players of that caliber that you could go target, that could at the very least be a big physical force for you in the middle. And I think the key is finding somebody who isn't making so much that his salary says this guy starts every single night. Instead, you want to have the versatility and have somebody who you can plug in for 20 plus minutes in a game when you need to. But if there's a game where they don't play that much, that's okay too. And obviously we're going to draw comparisons to, say, Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. I think that's something that they badly need, both some of it to take some of the physical toll off of Anthony Davis and also to provide the flexibility to play a few different styles. So that's something that I was disappointed they didn't get last summer. I'm hoping they get that this summer, is that true big physical player. 3-and-D wing, it would be my next priority list. I believe in today's NBA, there's no such thing as having too many 3-and-D wings. I think that you definitely need to go find somebody specifically that can just play both sides of the ball. I mean, you're going to hear this from every team out there. Yeah,
Yeah, that's more what I
every
mean, like a two-way wing. Well, they don't even
exactly.
have to necessarily be a great three-point shooter. It's just like, can you be a positive on both sides of the ball?
That's it. That's it. And I'm already hearing this from other teams too. We're hearing the words two-way player, right? That's what everybody's going to be looking for. So it's not going to be easy, but I absolutely think that should be higher on their priority list as well. And then, you mentioned if D'Lo goes, if something happens there, I think not only do you need a guard who's going to fit better next to Austin, assuming he stays, or if D'Lo stays and Austin goes, a guard who fits better. And by that, uh, like the final form of Max Christie is really kind of what we're talking about, like a defense first guard that can also space the floor next to an Austin Reeves or D'Angelo Russell. I think that's the best fit, the best archetype to put next to either guy. So that would be the third thing on my priority list. But again, that's a question mark depending on what happens with Reeves, what happens with D'Lo. Does either player get moved? All of that stuff, of course, matters. So that's the way I'm looking at the offseason. I'm prioritizing that big if I can get him. I want to take some burden off of AD. I'm not banking on him playing 76 games again this next season. And if this team's going to be built around Anthony Davis, you've got to protect them. Just like if you're going to get a marquee quarterback in the NFL, you better have an offensive line that can protect them. I want to do the same thing with AD.
And one thing I haven't really seen discussed a lot is the variance in terms of what the Lakers roster could look like
Yeah.
now entering the draft. And we'll see what happens with the number 17 pick, with the number 55 pick. I would suspect the number 55 pick ends up being a two-way guy, unless it is Bronny James, as Rich Paul has come out and said Bronny James will not be signing a two-way contract. So if it's Bronny James, then I doubt it's a two-way contract. But if it's not Bronny, I think that'll likely be a two-way contract.
Mhm.
And so let's just say, for argument's sake, like take 55 out of it, but 17 is there. You have 8 guys entering the draft, and then you have 4 players: LeBron James, D'Angelo Russell, Cam Reddish, and Jackson Hayes with player options. Then you have that number 17 pick, and right there you're at 13 guys, and that's before mentioning the number 55 pick, which again could be Bronny, or maybe the Lakers trade up in the second round to get Bronny. You have Max Christie, you have Taurean Prince, you have Spencer Dinwiddie. You have the incumbent free agents, and then you also have, depending on what happens with D'Lo, I guess in this scenario he's opting in. So then you have the taxpayer MLE of about 5.1 to play with. So like, the Lakers might just be out of roster spots, might be out of their control in terms of just what happens with Cam, what happens with Jackson, what happens with D'Lo. I think what all indications are, LeBron will be back. It's just a matter of does he opt in and extend in August, or does he opt out and resign? Lakers will offer him whatever he wants in terms of a contract and whichever path he wants to go down. But so if we put LeBron in, that's 9. But then Cam Reddish, I don't know if he's going to have a market outside of a minimum contract. And even then, he might not even have a lot of minimum offers. So I think Cam Reddish is probably more likely to opt in and just stay on a minimum with the Lakers. Jackson Hayes, I think there could be some market for him with the way that he finished the season. And maybe someone will be willing to throw a biannual or a taxpayer MLE at him. And so Jackson, I think, is more of a decision in terms of like what he actually wants. And then D'Lo, like we've heard Orlando as a potential suitor, but is that going to be for the same amount of money? Is it going to is it a shorter term deal, longer term deal? What does D'Lo want? What is his actual market outside of Orlando? There isn't a clear suitor. I've heard San Antonio mentioned. I don't see the fit there necessarily. I also think they might be trading for maybe we're trying to get a better point guard, maybe an all-star level point guard. The Lakers might just have a roster crunch here, and we're talking about how they're going to build up the roster and like all these needs. And at the same time, they might be relatively limited, and they might have to do a consolidation trade, or maybe even a couple of them, where they clear up some roster spots to sign guys and take chances on guys, unless they just run it back. And I think running it back would be a mistake. I think last year's roster was better than the record and was better than they're showing in the playoffs, but not quite at the level of Denver and clearly Dallas and Boston and maybe even Minnesota. So I think the Lakers need to make some, like, if they really want to win a championship next year, they got to make some changes. So in terms of the roster crunch and how that could play out, how do you see the Lakers trying to handle that?
Yeah, so I think there is a scenario where bringing back this rotation, while it's not the same roster, while it's not ideal, it's a path they could travel down. And that's one where if the right opportunity simply isn't there, and I think it's going to be a very difficult market this summer. You look at what's going on right now. You look at the teams that all picked before the Lakers. All but I want to say 3, maybe 4 of them have rumors out there that they are attempting to move their pick. Everybody is trying to move first round picks. Like that's
No
a
one
really
wants
tough
to
environment.
draft in this draft.
Right. Yet that's this draft. And that's part of why the Pelicans said, no, no thank you. We'll take 2025. You can keep this one. So that'll be a little bit of a difficult environment to make moves in. If the move simply isn't there, which the move was not there at the trade deadline, and we heard we're going to hang on to the picks because we're going to be able to make a bigger move in the summertime. If summer comes and goes and there isn't that move again, there's going to be some frustration there. But it could be possible that keeping the powder dry and then trying to do something by the trade deadline is the right decision if there's not a viable move to make. But otherwise, I agree with you. I think that they need to do something. I don't think it has to be a big something. Like, I don't think it has to be you cash everything in and go after Donovan Mitchell right now. If he's there waiting for them, they can get him. Sure. Right. They're probably going to make an offer. Let's face it. It's still in the Lakers DNA to chase stars, but I'm thinking a couple of tweaks, like of your 5, if you could get 2 of those things, 3 of them, like, I don't think you're getting 5 of those things.
You're not getting all 5. Although, like, there are guys, like, theoretically, let's say you bring in a good 3-and-D wing,
yes,
that checks your shooting box, right? So, and then maybe in that case, you're able to, you move Rui to the bench. Now Rui is kind of the wild card guy, and he's not starting, and maybe you just move him to the bench and start Vando. Like, there's different ways they can kind of handle it, but like, so some of this might just be internal development, and Max Christie could be a 3-and-D wing, and maybe Vando continues his offensive improvement. So like, there are ways where, and this kind of ties into the Dan Hurley conversation and player development and how you're using guys. But so some of this could just be internal, but for me, it was just like the general positions and skill sets that the Lakers need to add to next year's roster. And it could just be certain guys taking leaps or being used in different ways. And that's probably the ideal way for them, because it's the least, you get to retain your picks or retain your cap sheet to some extent. But I still think, like, especially on the wings, I look at the wings as like, unless Max Christie and maybe Maxwell Lewis both take significant leaps next season,
you've essentially got to take Rui Hachimura and Jared Vanderbilt and find some way to merge them together. That's exactly what you're trying to
said last episode.
Did you? That's
like the love child of Rui and Vando is like the perfect
that's exactly what you
starter.
Need. Who is that? Who's that guy?
I don't. It's probably a max player, right? Like, if you're defending, like, it's probably a star.
Is it Jeremy Grant?
I think the ideal guy, and he doesn't have the physicality of both of those guys, but like Mikal Bridges to me is like, he's a sweet spot of like a 3rd star, but like all-star level guy, but also 3-and-D skill set. He's been a role player. He's been a high-level role player in Phoenix, gone on a finals run. And he would be the perfect guy for me to slide in that front court position. Then you look at like what guys could actually be available, and it's like Kyle Kuzma, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Hunter, like all those guys have warts. Those guys aren't the level of defender that Bridges is. Then you go in a different direction, like a Dorian Finney-Smith, but then he's not the level of offensive threat that some of those guys are. So like it's tough to find that guy. And again, that guy's probably like, that guy's Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Paul George, and like those high level guys are the guys who can defend like a Vando, but then also, those guys are obviously different level than Rui offensively, but like that type, like a guy with Rui's level of talent on offense and Vando's defense, that's a tough guy to find. But like, that's basically the guy they need, I think, in that fit spot, or even a guy that's like 70 to 80% of that. And that's still pretty tough to find.
And then when you add on top of that, the restrictions of the new CBA, where right now the Lakers would be a tier 1 team. And so what that would essentially mean is that in any trade, they can't take back more salary than they're sending out. So then you got to factor that in to the equation of trying to make a move work. It's not going to be easy. It's not an easy job for Rob Pelinka this summer, but I do think they need to make some moves. They need to do some things. It's consolidate some of these guys if you can. Are there guys, like if you add Gabe Vincent into a deal, is another team doing backflips and excited about that? Probably not. Same thing with Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish. Can you find a way to get a few of these guys off your roster and open up some roster spots to bring in some new guys? It's going to be a challenge for Rob Pelinka, but I also think they're a team that's not that far off. You look at, I mean, obviously they're the example on top of mind because they're in the finals. But you look what Dallas did. They made a few moves here and there. They get Derek Lively. He ended up being a really good piece for them this year. And then you add a guy in PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. These guys are not stars. These guys are not, they're very good players, but they're not being looked at as, wow, this guy changes the balance of power in the NBA, but they fit. They fit the right way. And I think that's the new NBA. That's the path forward. And that's, looping all the way back to the Dan Hurley conversation. That's what teams are going to be looking to do. Find the right pieces around your stars. So if the Lakers can do something like that, where maybe it's not grabbing headlines where Lakers fans are going, oh my gosh, it's Donovan Mitchell that's coming, it's Trae Young, but it's a guy whose name might not be quite as flashy, but he might be the right fit. That's the type of thing that can, I think, really propel this team forward.
And for what it's worth, the Lakers have 3 tradable first round picks, 2024, 2029, 2031. And the Dallas Mavericks acquired Kyrie Irving for a first round pick, Daniel Gafford for a first round pick, and PJ Washington for a first round pick. 3 separate deals in 3 first round picks going outbound from Dallas. Now, Kyrie was available for that price for various reasons, and I don't see a player of his caliber being available for just 1 pick. I think any of these stars that could be potentially available are going to be at least 2, if not 3, if not maybe even 4, depending on who the player is picked. So like that's probably a pipe dream, but could you go find the next Daniel Gafford? Could you go find the next PJ Washington? Both of those guys were available at the trade deadline. Lakers only had 1 pick to move, but like either one of them, I think, really would have helped the Lakers over the course of the second half of the season. So identifying those guys, and both guys were hiding in plain sight on lottery teams. And those are the types of guys I think the Lakers need to be looking at is, are there some cheap bigs that can check some of these boxes that are maybe underutilized or undervalued on the, some of these lottery teams? Are there some 3-and-D wings that like, maybe they're shooting 33% on threes, or like defensively, they don't hold up great against wings, but like they got length, they got size and athleticism, and we can use them in a certain way. So like finding those guys that aren't perfect prospects, but can check most of what you need, and then finding a way to acquire them. Because right now, I think that the other crazy thing, and I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but like everybody's going for it. Like you can make the case, like 24 teams right now are trying to make the 20 play-in spots next season, and across both, collectively across both conferences. So it's like there's maybe like 5 or 6 teams that are willing to sell off their rotation pieces and tank and look to the future. And it's going to be an arms race to get players off of those teams, because we're talking about the Lakers likely needing a better backup big. So does Denver. So does Phoenix. So does Oklahoma City. New Orleans could be going through a big man makeover with Jonas Valanciunas. The Clippers, Daniel Tyson, Mason Plumlee are both unrestricted free agents. So like looking across the West, if you're not Denver, and even, Denver still needs a backup, but like if you're not Denver, Minnesota, or Dallas, you are looking to load up with size in your front court and physicality to match up with those 3 teams. So like and that's just to say the West. Like the East, you still got Giannis, you got Embiid, you obviously got the Celtics aren't going anywhere. So like there's just, and those guys have stretch bigs that kind of puts you in a tough spot where you don't want to go with like a plotting center that for Jokic and Embiid, because then that guy can't guard Porzingis. So it's like it's hard to roster build right now with how much talent and depth there is, and how spread out it is across the league. I think all the prices for these guys are going to be driven up just by scarcity and by demand.
Well, this is the NBA that Adam Silver has wanted. This is the age of parity, particularly in the Western Conference. And I think you touched upon 2 things here that are important. It's number one, it's going to be a difficult market. I think part of that's a byproduct of the play-in tournament, of course. But you've got, once again, and it's been years now where it's been more buyers than sellers, and that's going to drive prices up, and that's going to be a challenge for Rob Pelinka to overcome. But you also touched upon something else where, do you go with a plotting big and then they can't defend Porzingis? Do you go with more of a physical big in order to deal with Joel Embiid? Do you go with a more rangy big, and then they're getting just destroyed by Jokic and players like that? I think a lot of it, the new NBA, it's going to come down to not just how you build out your roster, but I think playoff matchups are going to be more important than ever. Which team do you draw in the postseason, and how do you match up with that team. I think that's going to become an even more important thing because, as you said, we're hitting a point where it's impossible to build a team that can deal with everything, that can deal with all these different styles. And so the type of roster that you build and who you run into in the postseason, what is your playoff path? I think that's going to wind up playing an even bigger role than we've seen in the past in who ultimately lifts that trophy.
And it's good timing because we are recording this right before game one
Yep.
of the NBA Finals. So I think that is a good segue into closing this episode. Trevor, thank you so much for hopping on. I know that our listeners are thrilled to see you and to hear you. And I had so many comments on both Twitter and YouTube asking for you to come on. It was long overdue, and I'm happy we did this, and I'm happy you joined me on today of all days, and we got to discuss the madness of this morning and how everything went today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and yeah, I'm glad that we got to break through all of the craziness of the day, and what's sure to be even more crazy days to come in this off season over the next couple of months. So, but again, thank you for having me on, Jovan. I appreciate it.
And thank you guys for watching and listening. I will be back next week with episode 30 of Buha's Block. I will talk to you then.